Hey everybody! Elijah, Mark, Preston, Devlin, Michael, Hayden, how are you guys doing? Alright, today is the day we're going to talk about making your paragraph. You've taken your notes from source text 1 and source text 2 and then you put it on a fused keyword outline. And now we're going to do step 4, which is to actually take your keyword outline and write your paragraph. Okay? So you're going to take your notes just like you do every time we do a paragraph, and you're going to create a sentence for each line of notes that you have. Okay? You can make your sentences however you want. You might want to say there are some interesting stories that tell about how the city of Rome began. The people settled on 7 hills near the Tiber River, and be sure to include all your elements of style, your ly adverbs, and your strong adjectives, your quality adjectives, and your strong verbs, okay, and all the goodies that are on your checklist. Now I've posted a link to the checklist on the forum so that you can print one out and use that to make sure that you have everything you need. And don't forget about your clincher. This is only one paragraph, so it's a lot easier than the last one we wrote. But you do have to have a clincher that repeats or reflects words from your title and repeats or reflects words from your topic sentence. Okay? So that's part of your homework. I'm going to give you a sample. This was written by a young man named Tobias. And this is a sample from this writing assignment. So you can see a little bit of what yours might look like. Okay, so I'll just read the whole thing and then we'll go through it and talk about some of the points. The great city of Rome, well, first of all, his title, of course, is a prestigious city. And I want you to notice that I start out here with the MLA format of the double spacing. But then I did not have enough room to get it all on one page just to show you guys. But when you do your paper, make sure that you double space between every line. Okay, a prestigious city. The great city of Rome was founded over 2,500 years ago. Around 753 BC, shepherds settled around 7 hills by the Tiber River. Over a vast expanse of time, Rome evolved into a massive city and formed a colossal and devastating army to invade and conquer other regions. There is a legend that Rome was started by 2 brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were cast into the Tiber River by their sinister uncle and were then raised by a wolf. Eventually, they grew up and planned to build a city with a massive wall. While they fashioned the wall, they fought over the city they planned to build, and tragically, Remus was killed by his irate brother. Therefore, the city was named Rome for Romulus. Whether Romulus and Remus ever existed, or if they were simply fanciful, ancient Rome will always be remembered as a powerful, prestigious, and prominent city. Okay, so the first thing you may have noticed is that there are some words that are highlighted. Great and Rome in the first topic sentence, and Rome and powerful in the clincher. Okay, so these 2 words repeat or reflect. Rome for Rome, and powerful is very similar to great. Okay, also you'll notice the title has the words prestigious city, and prestigious city is repeated here. Okay, so this last sentence repeats or reflects from the topic sentence and also from the title. All right, let's see what other goodies we can find. We have colossal, devastating. Okay, those are 2 very good adjectives. Invade and conquer are 2 strong verbs. Romulus and Remus, who, there's your who-which clause, who were cast into the Tiber River by their sinister uncle and raised by a wolf. And notice he didn't mention the shepherds, and that's okay, that he just chose to include the wolf raising the boys and didn't mention the shepherds, so that's fine. You can make this the way you want it to be. All right, let's see. What else do we have? Tragically is the ly adverb. Irate is another strong verb. What else? Oh, the last thing I want to make sure you see is the powerful, prestigious, and prominent city is the alliteration. Okay? So you may see some other things in here, but those are some things I wanted to point out to you. This is a good example of what your paper could look like. Of course, yours will be different. Everyone's will be unique, but that's an example. Okay, another thing I want to talk to you about today is something called a metaphor. You've heard of metaphors before? A metaphor is kind of like a simile, because it compares two things that aren't alike, but they share a common characteristics. And here's some examples. America is a melting pot. Now, if you said America is like a melting pot, that would be a simile. But America is a melting pot is called a metaphor. Okay, it's just saying this thing is this thing. Even though we know America is not actually a melting pot, they're similar because they both have mixtures of things in them. All right, what about my brother's room is a disaster area? Or maybe my room is a disaster area. Okay, if you want to make a simile, you might say, my room is as messy as a disaster area, because you have the word as there. But a metaphor doesn't use the words as or like. It just compares my brother's room to a disaster area. They're both similar. They both are maybe messy. There's things laying all around. Nothing's put away where it belongs. But they're obviously not the same thing. But you use a metaphor to compare them. Another one. You are my sunshine. Of course, a person can't be sunshine. And you could say you are like my sunshine, but that would be a simile. You are my sunshine is a metaphor. And the lake was a mirror reflecting the beautiful cloudless sky. Okay, the lake was a mirror. Obviously a mirror is not a lake, but a lake. If you've ever looked at a calm, peaceful lake when there's no wind blowing, it reflects, and it is like a mirror. So to say the lake was a mirror is very descriptive to help you see what the lake looked like. And lastly, her sister is a night owl. Obviously, her sister is not an owl, but her sister is like an owl in that maybe she stays up at night. She does all of her things at nighttime instead of the day, because that's what owls do. So you see, the metaphor is very similar to a simile, but different because it does not use the word like or as. It just says, this thing is this thing, or this thing was that thing. Okay? That's a metaphor. And this is another type of language that you can use when you're writing your paper to make it sound more interesting and descriptive and sophisticated. All right, let's review the ly adverb opener, because you are going to be putting one of these into your paragraph. Remember, it just is a word at the beginning of the sentence that's an ly adverb that is followed by a comma. Conveniently, my family has plenty of toilet paper. Happy, happy. Okay, make sure you put your comma after your ly adverb opener. And then the other example, eventually, comma, this awful pandemic will be over. Ly adverb eventually, comma. Okay, and remember also when you label this, this is a number 3 that you just put out in the margin of your paper, so you can indicate to me that you have included an ly adverb opener in your paper. And the number 2 opener is called the prepositional opener. And examples: in revenge for the Persian Wars, Alexander attacked Persia. In revenge for the Persian Wars is your prepositional phrase. In is the actual preposition. And I'm including a link to a list of prepositions for you to have on hand, or you can look them up on the internet if you want. Because you're going to need to include a prepositional opener in this paragraph. There are lots and lots of prepositions. I'm also going to provide a link to the ly adverb list in case you need some ideas for ly adverb openers. And again, outside my window comma, that's the prepositional phrase. Outside is the preposition. I heard my dog barking at a squirrel. All right. So So those are some things to make sure you include, but they will be on the checklist, and you can print that out with the link on the forum post. I want to talk to you about genre for a minute. Genre is a French word that means a type or a kind of something. And normally we use the word genre when we're talking about literature, but it can be used for describing other things as well. So there are a couple main types of genre. The first one is fiction. Fiction are stories that have fake elements in them. They may be realistic, but they're not true. They're not true to life. Fiction can include books like realistic fiction, which is a story that involves real people doing realistic things. Historical fiction, which can be a story that's set in a particular time in the past. The setting may be real, but the characters are usually made up. Now, an example of this historical fiction is Carry On, Mr. Bowditch, right? Okay, it was a story about him. It was in the particular time that it happened, back in the Revolutionary War era, and it may have included some components of fiction, but most of it was true and historically accurate. Carry On, Mr. Bowditch could also be seen as a biography, because it was about Nathaniel Bowditch's life. And an example of realistic fiction could be the book Holes, or perhaps Big Red was a realistic fiction. It was real people doing real things. Okay, so the next category in fiction is fantasy. And fantasy is a story that includes impossible or imaginary elements such as magic and talking animals. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Yep, the book we're reading, The Horse and His Boy, is an example of a fantasy book. Then there's traditional literature, which are cultural stories like fairy tales, myths, fables, legends, and things like that. There's science fiction, stories that involve advanced technologies like robots, outer space, and futuristic things. There are mystery and detective stories that are, stories that involve mysterious events usually solved and explained by the end of the story, and also detective stories like Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so those are the basic fictional genres. And then we have nonfiction works. These are books that have texts where the information is completely true. Okay, they could be informational books like your science book, or your math book, or your Bible, or a book about art, or anything that provides facts and information about a particular topic, maybe animals. It could be a biography. I'm reading a biography now about Alexander Hamilton, which is huge, but it's a true story of his life written by someone else. And similar to a biography is an autobiography. Auto means by self, so an autobiography is a book that someone writes about their own life. Okay, and there are other texts that can include both fiction and nonfiction, specifically poetry. Poetry can include both, usually expressing feelings and emotions, and often created in certain styles with rhymes. But those are the basic genres of literature. Now, literature contains, as you've seen when we do our story charts, it contains a setting, a bunch of characters, and a plot. And plot is the action of the story, what's happening, what goes on in the story. So in realistic fiction, a setting is in a realistic place like a school or a home or the park, kind of like the wheel on the school book that we talked about in when we've been marking some of the passages in our TAN book. And it's usually in the present time, or written in the present time, time like the book Big Red. It was written in the 1940s, but it was written in that time. It's maybe old to us because we've gone beyond that, but it was originally written in its own time. Fictional books have real characters, real types of characters. A boy, a girl, a man, a woman, but they're believable, but they're not make-believe. They're just regular everyday people, and they have to deal with regular everyday problems like fighting and divorce and war and love and all sorts of things. And the plot normally involves realistic scenarios. Okay. Now, historical fiction, the setting may be a realistic place, like Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. The setting was in Boston, and it was all over the world, in many real places. It could be in a time period from history, like the Revolutionary War, like Carry On, Mr. Bowditch, or it could be during Hurricane Katrina or in medieval times. But the characters are not real, usually. Some of them can be real, but they are believable in historical fiction because they are real-like, realistic. Okay, and they obviously behave like characters from that time period, like the Bronze Bow. Okay, when we read about that, it's set back in Israel, back in the time of Jesus. So the characters acted like people would who lived there back in those times. Okay. And then if you have a fantasy book like The Horse and His Boy, fantasy books may be set in a realistic place or in an imaginary world like the Land of Narnia, okay, that we've talked about so many times. Okay, they may take place in the present, the past, or the future, or in some other time that's not even categorized in our time periods. And they have a group of characters that could be real or imaginary, talking animals, creatures that don't exist in real life. And the plot in a fantasy may include realistic as well as imaginary or unexplainable or fantastical types of events. Okay, so that's a word or 100 words about genre. Let's get to The Horse and His Boy. Fantasy genre. Okay, we're going to go over the questions from Chapter 12 and Chapter 13. So try to have your questions and your vocabulary words with you so you can check to see if you have got the right answers. And if you don't have the correct answers on your vocabulary words, please write the correct answers in. So I don't want you to be misinformed. All right, for Chapter 12, the first word was magpie. A magpie is an intelligent black and white bird. This is the bird that was in Tashbaan with Susan, I believe, Queen Susan and King Edmund. Maybe the magpie appeared somewhere else as well, obviously. All right, and the next was dappled, which means marked with spots or patches. Usually you think of a dappled horse, or could be a dog or a cow. Lintel is not a lentil. A lentil is a bean, but a lintel is the horizontal support across the top of, if this is your doorway, the board that goes across the top is the lintel. It's what they were supposed to, the Hebrews were supposed to spread the blood on the doorposts at Passover, and they were supposed to put it on the lintel and on the doorposts. Okay, and then the last word was frosty. Frosty is having a stale or a warm or stuffy kind of atmosphere. Have you ever been in a room or a house that's kind of frosty? All right, question 1. When Shasta realizes that he had come through the mountain pass from Archenland to Narnia during the previous night, he says, "What luck that I hit it." But then he realizes that it wasn't luck at all. What was it that helped him get through the pass? So, what was it? It was Aslan, right? And he figures this out after he's walking with him for a while, and he finally realizes who he is. Trying to get to Chapter 12. Okay. Number 2. How were the trumpets, which Shasta heard at the dwarf's house, different from the horns of Tashbaan and King Loon's hunting horn? Okay, they were clear and sharp and valiant, more like a war cry or a heraldic cry. All right, and number 3, why did Corn and Thornbutt, why didn't they finish their fight? Okay, near the end of the chapter, they're getting ready to go, and they're having a little tussle. They're disagreeing over something, and Thornbutt trips and falls, and so that kind of ends their little fight. He sprains his ankle pretty badly. Okay, so that's it for chapter 12. And then in chapter 13, they are getting ready to go off to war. And here you can see, I don't know if you can see all this, but pictures of them. That's probably King Edmund there. And some of the other soldiers, maybe that's Corin and Shasta right there. And here are some of the beasts riding behind. These are the giants with their big boots with the nails on them. And some of there's the bears, and oh, there's Shasta and Corin there. Okay. So, pinnacle. What is a pinnacle? It's the high pointed piece of a rock. In this case, where we're talking about the mountains, they saw the pinnacle. It can also mean the most successful point of something, as in like your career, the pinnacle of your career. Hauberk. What is a hauberk? It's a piece of armor that covers to the neck and shoulders, and that's what a lot of the soldiers were wearing. And to chide means to scold or rebuke. And King Loon does this when he finds Corin at the end of the chapter. Okay, questions. How did Corin describe Queen Susan? He was talking about Lucy, because Lucy was there, but Queen Susan was not there. And he described Lucy as good as a man, or maybe as a boy. But Susan he described as being ordinary, like a grown-up lady. She doesn't ride out to the wars anymore, but she's an excellent archer. All right, number 2. From whose perspective does the author narrate the majority of the Battle of Anbard? Okay, do you remember? It was from the old hermit of the Southern March, when they're in their enclosure with Wynne and Aravis, and they look into the pool, and this is one of the magical elements that makes this a fantasy novel, but they look into the pool, and it's like a mirror, and they can see what's happening in the battle. They can't hear, but they can see what's going on. All right, and lastly, what would Rabadash have preferred instead of being made ridiculous? Okay, remember at the end of the battle, he was close to the castle and he stepped up on the mounting block, which was a block of wood that they would use to mount up on a horse if they needed to. He stepped up on a mounting block and to get a better perspective and better advantage in his sword fighting. And when he went to jump down, the back of his clothing caught on a hook on the wall that was used to tie up the horses. And he ended up hanging there, and if you've ever been caught on a hook on a wall, you know that you can't get yourself out or off that hook. And so he was being made ridiculous, and he did not like it. It hurt his pride. So what it said was he would have much rather faced torture than to be made ridiculous. So that speaks to his character. And you'll see in chapter 15, the title of the chapter is Rabadash, the Ridiculous. But spoilers. So that's all we have for now. Your homework will be to write your paragraph, and don't forget to include all of your elements of style. Get the checklist off of the forum and print it out so you'll know what all you need to include. And of course you'll have your Horse and His Boy, chapter 14, questions and vocabulary words. Okay, I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.